Welcome to COIQ, where you learn how health innovators maximize their success. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy, founder of Legacy DNA and international best-selling author of How Health Innovators Maximize Market Success. Through candid conversations with health innovators, early adopters, and influencers, you'll learn how to bring your innovation from idea to startup to market domination. And now, let's jump into the latest episode of COIQ. Welcome back to the show, COIQ listeners. On today's episode, I have Daniel Levitt with me. He is the founder and CEO for BIOS. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hi there. Great to see you, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So thanks for joining me. Let's start off the conversation by giving our listeners and viewers a little bit about your background and what you've been innovating in your journey. It's a very exciting story, so I want to make sure we start off with that.
Absolutely. So, I may be kind of a little bit different from most. I spent my whole life in startups. I've founded about 7 companies around the bio IT area and high tech. And the journey has been an interesting one. The first startup, I spent 4 years working, starting in sales, actually, moving up through roles in marketing. And it was an amazing journey with a startup, which eventually did not succeed. But I always tell those who are young and coming out of college that, it's tempting to start your company right when you leave college, but oftentimes it's better to join an existing startup. Spend the time learning from others, and really getting that experience, and then maybe start your company if that's your journey.
Sure.
So I found that to be very important. There's so much learning to be had out there. And, although sometimes we think we know it all, we might know a lot about that small area, which we're trying to focus on. But there's so much out there which is very generalized and applies to almost every company. And I really think people should learn. And going back to my background a little bit, so I did start in a software company. After that company I'd left originally, which I'd started with, which was a software company also. And this was in '99, where I co-founded a company, was a CEO. A company was called WebAppoint. And that company was later on acquired by Microsoft. So that was, as a founder, you kind of say, wow, this is a dream. You kind of start a company, relatively quickly. Microsoft comes knocking on the door, it was a phone call saying we're interested in chatting, go through the motions, and then boom, Microsoft has acquired your company. Interestingly enough, they actually offered me a job at Microsoft with a lot of stock options. At that time, I refused. My co-founders, the 2 technical co-founders, went to work there. And that was interesting because it sounded like, this is an interesting maybe point for people to think about, is you just sold your company, you made some money, the last thing you really want to do is, okay, let me just go right to continue working if you don't have to.
Right.
So when I look back, was it a mistake or not a mistake? It's hard to kind of say, okay, in hindsight, but I think I should have maybe been more humble and went to work for Microsoft, because that would have given me another layer of experience in more of a corporate environment. And I think that would have maybe been an interesting decision. So I think that's the lesson there, is really, even if you feel on top of everything, you're just starting, you're just learning, and go from there. And that was an interesting point. After that, I founded another company, or co-founded another company as CEO, which is in the realm of personal protective equipment in the medical field. And we protect against gamma radiation. And it focuses on 3 areas: on first responders, on the space area where astronauts are going to space, need protection from radiation, and also the medical professionals in a lab setting. They also need radiation protection. A lot of procedures use high levels of radiation during procedures. And that company is now currently doing great. I left it to do my current company, BIOS, and that company has now got a product actually on the International Space Station. So we just launched there about 2 months ago, and it's right there being worn by astronauts. So it's really exciting to actually know that something you started from scratch has a physical product with your company name now floating in zero gravity on the International Space Station. And, next year there's a mission planned for our product to go around the moon on a cislunar mission with the German Space Agency. So it's wonderful how you can create something from an idea and then you really see it growing. But I will say that company has been around for almost 10 years.
Wow.
So it's a long journey. The average startup takes about 7 to 11 years to exit. if they are so lucky. So patience is key here. Things can take many years for getting the product out there, building awareness, penetrating markets, monetizing. So that's just another lesson there in terms of be very patient, and things can really work out. Even if it takes 10 years or 15 years, it's still fine. Yeah. As long as it's progressing. And then the third thing, which is kind of my what I believe is my third success, and this is the current company, Bios, which is a kind of a search engine for life science researchers, whether they're in academia or biopharma. And what it does, it helps them conduct experimentation more correctly, more accurately. So we all know that a lot of scientific research is not reproducible. I think the numbers are almost 80% of scientific research. If somebody goes and say, okay, I can see this article that was written, let me go out there and try to duplicate that experiment. They try to duplicate it and get the same results, and they can't replicate it. So what we've built is a search engine which kind of uses natural language processing to analyze scientific articles, structure the data, and give the researchers who are doing these important experiments for us to develop new drugs and cure diseases just be more effective at that. So this is a wonderful AI company, and we're doing great. We have customers like Thermo Fisher Scientific and New England Biolabs, Lonza, Roche. And this is a very exciting journey, which I'm on right now. And, Stanford's invested in us, and we're very excited. But again, this is a long journey. We've been doing this for almost 7 years. And now we're pushing monetization about a year or so in. But again, you have to be patient. It can take a long time until you really see the fruits of your effort. But I think that's kind of my background in a nutshell. I will add one little point, which is kind of nice, is my dad's a professor at Stanford and won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2013. So it does help to have influential people, either as acquaintances or family members, if possible, because that opens a lot of doors. People listen when they get an email from a Nobel laureate, they will respond. So try to leverage people in your circle that are already connected, because we're all bombarded with so much stuff today. It does help to have someone who can get you that attention.
Not bad, Daniel. Not bad. So let's rewind a little bit to the Microsoft story, because I'm sure our viewers and listeners are pretty anxious to hear a little bit more about that experience. So, take us through, like, when you first started the company, what was the mindset or your dreams for the exit strategy? Did you have your mind or your heart set on Microsoft from day one? Let's kind of just take us through that journey and how you got from, and I have an idea, to I'm selling it to Microsoft.
Okay, that's very good. So I will state that, I think there are two different types of founders, probably many more, but just in a few categories. There are the technical founders, the ones who are either, in my realm, the software engineers, the ones who write the code and come up with a cool idea. Or there's maybe the scientists who have some kind of an idea for a medical device or some kind of a technology platform, like my co-founder, Dr. Corinne Latchme, who was at Stanford as a postdoc and came up with the idea for Bios. So I find that, it's not that I don't think that I have good ideas. I find that consistently over the last 25, 26 years of doing startups, every single startup has been someone else's idea. And it's always been a technical person, a scientist or engineer who's had the idea. And I find that my role was to be that other half, to be the person who comes and helps them raise the money, build the team, build an execution plan, and operates. So I think that's so. In the Microsoft case, I was the operator. I found a couple of engineers who had this idea, had some initial working prototype, and the idea was, okay, let's find investors. Typically, angel investors are the best source for early money. People who can write checks for as much as $25,000, $50,000, $100,000. And those initial checks are very helpful. We start with small salaries. And the initial objective was not to sell the company, of course. It was sold relatively quickly. The objective was to raise a certain base amount of money that we could hire a few people who could not only be engineers, so maybe 3 or 4 engineers in total, and maybe on the business development sales side, a couple of people as well, if we're in that phase. And to do that, I believe that a company needs to really raise about $1 million. Less than $1 million, it's hard to operate. And it's very simple. If you just look at the burn rate, $1 million requires maybe, if you spend $80,000 a month, that can cover maybe 7, 8, 9 people in an office for a year. So I would say that if you can't raise $1 million, and it doesn't have to be in one chunk. You can start with, say, raising $50,000 and a couple $100,000. I recommend that the method to raise that money should always be on what's called a safe note. It's a simple agreement for equity, something which Y Combinator came out with. In the past, people used to use convertible loan agreements, CLAs, or convertible notes. It's not meant for startup environments because they have a maturity date where an investor can say, okay, after a year, okay, I want my money back. And that can put the startup into a very difficult situation. They're also interest bearing, which requires that you have to pay them more than they actually invested. So safe notes are the way to do it. Raise that money, get started, hire people. Again, but don't hire more people than you need. Try to have the founders be the ones who are doing most of the work. And it's amazing how a founder can take on many, many roles. A founder who's never done, managing engineers. Sure, they can manage engineers. They can start, looking at the sprints. They can put together agendas. They can have meetings with the engineers. And it's surprising how far you can get without hiring so-called professionals. The professionals need to come in when you start scaling the business, but that can be many, many years down the road. It's that far off. Hire people who can individually contribute, engineers who are going to not do the managing, but do the work. I also find that the type of person you want to bring on, especially in those early days, is someone who is very committed, very entrepreneurial. So, I'm not saying people have to work all the time, but you want someone who's excited, who has no problem answering an email on a Saturday or a Sunday, excited to work, Friday night. It could be from home, but, you want them to be happy. Someone who expects a 9-to-5 job should absolutely not be involved in an early stage startup. Even if they want to be an entrepreneur, it's not for them because really there are no benefits. The benefit is just working on something cool with cool people, learning a lot. And I think when you tell people what's the main benefit, it's learning, they don't get it because okay, what about money? What about my free time? So I think you have to find the right people for the early stage venture. And then after that, we raised the money, we hired the small team, and then the method was very quickly to start getting to monetization. So we immediately started to find partners we could have agreements with, and start to show proof that not only have we developed technology, but we've developed technology that other people actually need and want. So if you build something which is cool, it's not enough. It has to be solving a problem or addressing a pain that someone else has. And I think there's always this interesting point, which I think really, really resonates well with any startup when you think about, is your product or something you developed going to make money? And that is, are you firing someone else or some other process or task? So think about it in that sense. What is being done today inefficiently or incorrectly that your solution can actually do better? So you're actually firing the current way of doing things, or it's not necessarily in the sense of firing the person. You're firing a current way of doing something. And if when you're looking around, you don't really see that one thing you're firing, it's going to be really hard for you to get your product out there or service because it's hard to convince someone here. I've got something new. They will ask, okay, how's it going to help me do what I'm doing better? It's going to be a hard sell. So you really want to try to look for. Don't create things which are more like wants. Create things that address needs and make sure you actually can very clearly find what you're firing in the current process. I think that was something we learned. And then, out of pure luck, Microsoft called us and was interested in learning more about our technology. I think the acquisition went very fast. And there is a lesson here as well, because the technology we had built our platform on happened to be Microsoft technology. And so when they did an evaluation of the technology, in their mind, they could very quickly see how they could incorporate our company's technology into their current platforms, which I think accelerated the process. So I think after that acquisition, my thinking was, okay, let me think about who could potentially acquire the company. Maybe that should influence how we're actually building our technology, because you can choose to code your platform in many ways. You can choose the different platforms. And I think there's some forethought to that process of, okay, it'll definitely be easier to close an acquisition if you can be more aligned with the acquirer in certain ways. So always kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But that was a cool event. I will say one thing which I think is important for founders to realize, and this is kind of last point on this Microsoft transaction, is that there's a concept of acceleration of vesting for stock options. So stock options. You can also put in place something where if the company gets acquired, then if you had, let's say, 3 or 4 year vesting, all those stocks will vest immediately, which means now you actually own those stock options and can convert them into the shares of the acquiring company or cash. Okay, so because we hadn't operated for that long, a lot of our employees had stock options. The founders are okay. They usually have stock purchase agreement, actual shares, so there are no problem there. But the employees who had worked hard have stock options. Not enough of it had vested. Some of them maybe not even past the cliff period. And the acceleration clause, was something which would have helped them a lot, which wasn't in those agreements. And I remember this interesting situation with one of our investors who, didn't agree with me. And in the event I did what I thought was right, is I actually said, okay, if I accelerate all the shares or all these options for the employees, I might personally lose a couple $100,000, and the investors would lose and the other founders would lose. But these individuals would now get another check of $80,000, $100,000, which could at that point have been a down payment on a house instead of getting $5,000. Yeah. And I remember the argument with the investors saying, hey, I'm going to accelerate everyone. The fact that we were sold relatively quickly was not in everyone's plan, but they need to benefit as well. I don't mind giving a bit of my money. The investors were very against that. And I think that's kind of a lesson as well. Choose who you want to be on your team as an investor. You want people who are aligned with your values. And it's always about doing the right thing. So I always believe in doing the right thing. You have to look at the people around you. Karma does exist. And, just be good, be nice, and do the right thing, whether or not others agree with you or not.
Yep. So a whole chock full of lessons already packaged in one story. I love it. So, one of the things that you said that I think is really interesting is this distinction between the founder being the one that has the business acumen or commercialization acumen versus being the technologist or the physician or the scientist that has the idea of the technology. I would also say, building the company from a different mindset of being technology first versus being customer first is very different. So just kind of talk about that a little bit, because I wonder if your early background in sales and marketing, shaped your role as the business expert to come alongside these other innovators. And then with that sales and marketing background, it made you think not only just about the problem, but even about the customer first versus the technology or the science first.
Yeah, I think that's all very interesting analysis. I definitely agree with what you're saying. So I did start in sales. It was not I didn't intend on starting in sales. Actually, I think it was a kind of a fluke, which happened at the time. I was in the kind of the mid 90s, and got into sales at a startup. I actually wanted to work in marketing. But the interesting point here, and this is what I realized, is that about 60% of CEOs of companies have actually started in sales. So if you think about that, sales is a critical skill set, because you really can understand, what people want, what people need, and how to offer it to them. And that's, I think, a critical skill set. So, the idea here that, someone is born with a certain skill set, I think it's a personality trait. I think some of us are much more into the technical side and inventing things, and other people are much more in the, okay, let's raise the money, let's talk to investors. And I think that if somebody says, okay, what is the skill set which I have, which is, the thing which makes a difference in my role. And I'll come back to a VP who I'd worked with, many, many years ago. And he basically said, that my ideal tag of who I am is basically a product or evangelist. So, being able to evangelize what you believe in and convince people that what you have is the best thing since sliced bread is a huge skill. And I believe that people who don't have that ability to really be convincing and articulating things, whether it's in writing or in speaking, are going to have a really hard time being the CEO or commercialization leader of a company, which is fine, because honestly, I've met so many amazing technical people. And I think that even if some person had this ability, okay, I'm this, maybe Elon Musk would maybe an example of someone who can kind of do both really well. I actually think that having additional people as founders with you is really, really helpful. I would not want to start a company by myself. I'm more than happy to give equity so that somebody else can be with me in this journey. And you really want people who are different from you, people who can actually, argue or discuss things with you, I'll give you an example, like my co-founder, Dr. Corinne Latchme. So she came from the scientific background. She's come up with ideas which I initially thought didn't make sense. I thought there's no way this is going to work. The customer is not going to accept it. But after seeing her, be right about 5 times over the last few years, I've built this trust that she gets the vision. She gets what customers really want, and it's very comforting to me because I almost say, okay, if she thinks this is going to work, okay, there's a high likelihood that she is right. And if I was doing this by myself, I wouldn't have that. If she was doing it by herself, she wouldn't have someone to kind of challenge her ideas or kind of say, well, maybe it's wrong or right. So I honestly believe that do not start a company by yourself, but do not randomly find someone. Find someone who can really be this, bouncing board or something where you can actually discuss ideas with, brainstorm with politely. Even if it's sometimes heated, your company will be much better off for that. So again, coming back to that initial point that you made, I think, I definitely came from more of a sales evangelizing background, which is more on the commercialization aspects. And I think where it becomes important is that, things start with a product or idea or service, right? But, I'll give an example, which, Steve Jobs gave, which I think is really, really true. Let's all think of a printer. Let's think of a laser printer, especially the Apple laser printers, which are kind of these very neat, clean, square boxes, these cubes, which output a paper. So the engineers who develop that printer, they think about the gears inside that printer and how it all works, and the lasers moving in there. And it's true, it's remarkable and unbelievable. They might even want the side panel to be transparent so people can look inside. But what Steve Jobs said is that ultimately the customer, the one who has that need, all they care about is that piece of paper that comes out of that slot, nothing else. And this is, I think, a good example for me because, you really have to be thinking in terms of that piece of paper coming out of that printer, not in terms of the gears or how the whole thing does it. Get it all right. Make sure it's all working beautifully and perfectly and reliable. But the key is, does somebody want that piece of paper? What is the quality of that piece of paper? So very critical to not be so super focused on the product and developing more and more features unless you are 100% sure that what you're doing will lead to monetization, and lead to monetization always quicker than you think you need to, because it's very, very hard. From the second you start to monetize, it could take years. So don't wait. I see a huge number of founders waiting too long, focusing too much on the product without thinking how that product solves a certain need for someone else.
Yes. So I was talking to a physician who is immersed in the problem all day, every day, has for years, decided that they were going to develop a product or technology to solve that problem. And they've been iterating on that product. Now, it's actually been, you can download the app in the App Store, but they have no commercialization strategy whatsoever. And so for 3 years, they just keep adding more features and functionality without one paying customer or even a strategy to get one paying customer. And it breaks my heart because I know that this person is so passionate about it, but the world probably could use it, but the world will probably never know that this even exists.
Yeah, that is sad. And I think someone like that could truly benefit from someone who has experience commercializing something and getting it out there, because you could have something amazing, but if nobody knows about it, it's unfortunate, both in terms of the utility it could provide to other people, which is being lost, but also in terms of you personally and your company. So I think that happens much more than people realize. That there's some scary numbers out there that 98% of startups that have been funded fail. So, the odds are against us essentially. And I do like the point you mentioned about continuing adding features, because that's what a lot of people do. They kind of have developed some kind of a product, or it could be a widget, or whatever it is, or service, and they think, okay, I'm not selling because it's missing this feature. But almost always is never that. It's not that one feature will change. And you spend a lot of time, maybe your last dollars, on developing that feature, then you release it, and nothing much changes. It's really not about that. You just have to figure out, am I solving a core need? So maybe I have to pivot to a different customer. Maybe I have to repackage my technology in a different form so that it actually appeal to that need out there. And I will stress one thing, that I'm also involved in StartX, which is a Stanford's accelerator. I judge the applicants for those who want to be accepted into the program. And you see a lot of companies that have amazing ideas, but totally don't understand the commercialization aspects. And it's really scary because, those are the people you want to bring into the program if they have something amazing, but they have to be willing to learn. And one thing I will add here, which I also think is critically important, which is something which, I'm learning all the time about this, is that before you go too far in your company, interview customers. And I hear the best companies, what they do is, even if they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years along, they're still spending time every week talking to 1, 2, 5, 10 customers or potential customers, just asking them questions. Because a lot of times, and this is something I'll give you some insight from my current company, what we found is that, we have a service we're offering and we're kind of pushing it and, closing, and customers like it. But as soon as you ask the customer, okay, we're offering this, but what would you like to see? What do you think here would be, a little bit, more customized towards your specific needs? As soon as they feel that they can get something more specifically that they want, the ability to sell it to them switches 180 degrees. Suddenly they're saying, I want this. When can I get this? Instead of you pushing it. And what have you really done here? You haven't transformed your product completely. You've just adjusted it to be aligned with what they are asking for. So asking your customers is great for learning. It helps in selling. And I know there's a whole program which Steve Blank at Stanford put together, and it's used by the National Science Foundation as well. Interviewing customers is become like literally, scientific evidence for success for all startups, and better to do it sooner than later. And it's amazing how much you'll learn. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Just talk to people. What are they going to say? They'll say, I'm not interested in talking to you. Go to the next one. Amazing insights can be had.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. So Daniel, I think that is like probably the most critical advice or wisdom that we could ever share with any entrepreneur or innovator out there, that, the earlier, the better. So many times I see, I've got an idea, I know the problem and the solution, I build the widget, the solution, and now I'm going out and I'm going to do these customer interviews. So it's kind of a static, one moment in time experience. Most of the time, I'm just confirmation bias. I'm just looking for them to confirm what I already believe to be true. I'm really not soliciting new insights because that would derail my whole strategy and plan. And I'm going to market, and it's like I'm going to do just one time check the box kind of thing. Yep, I did these interviews. And I love what you said because it's so important. And it's something that you're seeing to be a lot more prevalent in both startups and mature companies and other industries, but we're still just kind of scratching the surface on implementing this in healthcare from the very beginning. Like when I think about, I'm going to get investors, I'm going to get advisors, I'm going to get target customers. Like day 1, day 2, really, really early on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I've seen is so a lot of the people who come to Stanford StartX program are actual faculty members at Stanford. So professors who've come up with ideas from the medical school.
Yep.
And they have remarkable things. And they're sitting in the room and they kind of feel they want to be an entrepreneur. But you do feel that they have to bring someone on the business side. And sometimes it's hard because someone who's a professor at Stanford has gone through a lot of hurdles in life and has done a lot of amazing things. So for them to now partner equally with someone who's, maybe a lot younger but has startup experience, I think that's always sometimes of a mental block. But they have to do that. It's you can have the best idea in the world, but if you really want to make something big, you've got to do that. And I think what I see a lot of professors do because of that is they don't start companies themselves. What they'll do, they'll stay in the lab, stay as a professor or in the medical school, and they will basically sell their idea to another bigger company for peanuts.
Yep.
Because to them, it's just an easier way out, and they don't want to start a company when they could actually build big companies. And what I see, which is quite amazing, because I do see a lot of these medical companies, you see companies that come out of, say, Stanford, and within 3 years get sold for $1 billion to companies like Bristol Myers. It's shocking. And then those same guys go out and start another company, which is worth a couple of billion, as well, just after. So the medical schools, these ideas are sometimes unbelievable. I think they get sold off prematurely. And people and professors just stay as advisors to a bigger company that takes it all. If those individuals would align themselves more with the business people like, I think, myself, not giving myself overdue credit, but there's definitely another side to this. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand those areas which people come with these amazing ideas, but I certainly understand how to form a company responsibly, reliably, and to initiate and execute on commercialization. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a mindset. The other thing I would give as a point to people who are in the medical field is that I think they have a very kind of stable, secure position usually, which has taken them many years to get to. I think they're much more scared to leave it and go and start a company because they feel they're like ending that road, versus somebody like myself who's always been doing startups. I don't mind. I'm happy to go and do the next one. And so I think there is some kind of reluctance, and it's especially true of those who are already in faculty positions.
Yeah.
And I see that in the StartX interviews. They're just like literally the question we ask always is, are you full time? Okay, I will be full time later on. What amount of funding does need to be raised? So, and that's really kind of the last thing an investor wants to see. They want to see everyone full time now, not later when there's money. Take the risk now.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting point, but yeah, I just think there's not enough push in that area, and there's amazing ideas to be had.
Sure. Yeah. And so probably similar to Steve Blank's idea, I have a 5-co framework that I created. And one of the things that I think it makes it unique is that, so we're not only including the customers in the ideation phase, but even in launch. Right? So it's not even just like, hey, help me build this technology solution that you're going to love and want to buy, but also including the customers in the launch process and thinking about this as just part of the culture. It's just what we do. And you touched on that too. It's not like we're going to do a focus group and then everybody's going to go back and maybe in another 6 months or another year, we're going to do another focus group. Like we build it into our operating processes of, we got this continuous flow of information of how are we building, meeting needs, launching, to collectively, where we really start to see our target customers as part of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we try to think, okay, if I'm trying to close a new customer for our service right now, in that sales discussion, what is the number one thing I can show them that will give them confidence that what I'm selling them has value and will give them benefit? And it always comes down to reference customers. Everyone wants to see your product live on some other customer's website, being used by some other customer. And again, you can do that through creating case studies, having press releases where your customers are quoted, but it always comes down to that. And that's why it's so hard to get that first or second or third customer. Once you get them, they're amazing references. So I think your point is very valid. It's not only in the ideation stage that you want to ask people and you want to do it. There's really no ideation stage. It's almost like there's endless ideation right. Around the concept. Your ideation stage is for every feature, every direction you want to take, every new market. So it's continuous. And I think that customer interviewing or customer interactions and asking, not telling, asking is the right way. But I think sometimes founders' ego gets in the way where they think, okay, I came from this domain. I know exactly how it works. And that's fine. They might know exactly how it works in one sense of it, but there's a whole world out there that maybe you have to educate, and they might not understand the way you're presenting it. So you need to switch the way you're conveying the messaging. So I think this is something great out of this conversation, which is really being focused on, is talk to those who you want to be your customers all the time throughout the entire venture. Even if it seems artificial, even if it sounds, a waste of time, it's really valuable. You would be shocked how much you can learn from talking to them.
Yeah, that's great. So do you have any insights in like the size of that customer, right? So I also see a lot of folks get a little, I call it like woo-woo, if, a big health system, right, with a really deep brand, ends up being their pilot customer or their first customer. And, there's some pros and cons to that. This customer might end up being extremely demanding and take over your whole product development strategy. And now all of a sudden, at the end of the day, you might be so inclined to invest in that path because you want the additional revenue to come in, right? And you want to make sure that this customer is satisfied, but then you might end up with something that's really not commercially viable. It's great for this customer, but not necessarily commercially viable across the entire market segment. In your experience, is there any pros and cons between like a large player, small player, or middle player, and how that might help with product development as well as with the launch process?
Yeah, so it's actually very common to get into a relationship with a kind of a big, medium-sized customer because what you're doing in that sense, you're actually having them fund your development. Now, the reason they're doing it, it's not for philanthropic reasons. They're doing it because they probably see potential in your company as being acquired by them. So it's more of a strategic partnership, but you have to be very, very careful not to create a product solely for them, that if that relationship goes sour or if, for example, the money is not significant, you're not stuck with something which you cannot later on sell to someone else. So again, it's always about how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And then this is, again, an important tip for raising funding. You have to see yourself as equal to the partner, whether it's an investor, whether it's another company. The problem with a lot of these deals, it's done like, okay, I am small, I have this little idea, you're helping me, instead of being more of a commercial agreement between two equals. I'm bringing this amazing technology, I'm willing to do development for you, but you have to pay for it, and it's a part of what we're doing. It's not the entirety of the company. But the last point on this is that ultimately the reason they're doing this is most often because they want to either acquire the technology for themselves, and they don't really care if they say no at the end and you're stuck with nothing. So got to be very careful.
Yeah, yeah. So Daniel, as we think about, all of your different experiences, including, your current company, what do you think the number one challenge that entrepreneurs or innovators are facing right now in healthcare, and what's the wisdom or the lesson learned that you would share in response to that?
Yeah, so I think one of the problems is that the products in healthcare tend to be very, very narrow in the need they're solving. And I think that's sometimes dangerous because it's almost like either it works or doesn't work. And I think oftentimes it makes you think, okay, I have this amazing idea, and it might be an amazing idea, and it might actually solve a need which is critical, but what investors want to see, they want to see a big market, which means that you can just take the widget, take the service, and think about it, okay, how much money am I going to be able to generate in sales from this item? And sometimes it's difficult for founders because they have a lot of passion towards this one problem that they might have seen, in a clinic environment or maybe in a hospital, and it's truly an important need that needs to be solved. But it might be something that you do need to go and find a Medtronic or a Johnson & Johnson and actually have them productize it and make a company out of it. And you maybe are on the patent, and then you could get licensing fees. You have to be careful because a product that you believe, okay, great, I can make 20,000 of these or 50,000 of these, and I'll make a few million in revenue. That is not something people want to invest in. Investors who are serious investors want to see a business that can be worth $1 billion with a B. And that means in the best case scenario, you'll be able to reach $50 million annual recurring sales. And that's a lot of sales. If your business can generate 5-10 million a year, I think that's a great success. But it's not something you can go to traditional investors with, and you have to find a different route to build your business. But I do find that in the medical field, a lot of these solutions are very, very specific in terms of what they solve. And if it's a therapeutic, it's even harder because very often it's just an idea and it's unproven. And then the chance of that succeeding is very, very low. So I think the lesson here is, even if there's a really, really deep need for something in a specific context, if that cannot be projected out to much, much larger revenue numbers which maybe seem crazy because to us, if we sell something and generate 5 or 10 million a year, it sounds like a lot, and it solves a critical need, which saves lives. It's not enough. Investors will not look at it seriously, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so important. I think it's like a balance between, my initial commercialization or go-to-market strategy might be on a single narrow market or like a niche marketing strategy, but I have plans in place for it to be this bowling pin effect of like, all right, tackled it, knock that one down. So you've got the focus up front, right? So you're not spreading resources too thin, but at the same time, you have plans to be able to sell that to multiple sub markets, right?
Yeah. So that's a good point. So ultimately, it's a little different from what I said earlier in terms of like what I said earlier is one thing where you have a very specific product which isn't applicable to many markets. In your context is right in a different sense that you basically have multiple markets that you can target with your product. So if your product is a product that applies to not only a single narrow vertical market, but can apply to many markets, it just needs to be kind of adapted. That's great. That's fine. Because then what you're talking about is more, okay, I'm going to choose a first market or first customer type to penetrate. And that typically is called your beachhead customer. And that's very good because it's basically saying, okay, I know I can approach a lot of other markets, but I'm going to be very focused because I don't have enough money. I don't have enough money to develop a product in 5 different markets simultaneously. I'm going to go after that beachhead customer, kind of the lowest hanging fruit, the market which will like it most. And that market could generate only 5, 10, 15 million a year. And that's totally fine because your product's applicable to other things. What I was more worried about is that the product is very, very narrow as a device, which can't necessarily be adapted to other markets. Which to me is kind of sad. It's almost like orphan drugs where you have, there are a lot of diseases out there which just don't affect enough people and therefore the drug companies don't address, but they're actually critically important. So I think actually investing in things which are, maybe smaller is a good thing. And there are probably investors out there who are okay with that. But when you talk to the big ones, if you want to go to the big venture capital firms, if you can't show them that you can be worth $1 billion, which means 50 million plus in sales, you're not going to be taken. But I think your point is truly remarkably valid here, is that beachhead market is critical. So even if you develop something which is really cool, if it can apply to multiple verticals, that's perfect. Choose one where you have the most demand, the fastest demand, the most alignment without having to adapt your product too much, and then go after that, prove that there's demand, make some money, and then use that to raise additional funds and go after additional markets. But yeah, very, very good point.
Yeah, I'm so glad you clarified that because I do see a common pitfall is that I can sell many products to many markets, and I don't pick something, and so I'm trying to. It seems as though I'm trying to be all things to all people, and I don't have a whole lot of money.
The money aspect's the hard parts, and I think it's sometimes tempting. But again, I'm coming from my experience in the past. In the past, I would have just said, okay, let's go after this and this and this, and it's just you kind of have to just choose one, right. One thing you're doing, and it's sometimes hard because you're kind of, but the focus is crazy because you'll learn so much, and by just doing that one market, very focused. And also investors love that. Investors hate that you come and show, okay, this works for this and for this and for this and for this. It's great, but you're basically 5 years too early in terms of implementing that commercialization strategy. Prove that you can just get me one customer, get me one type of product that works for one market. But very, very good. That I totally agree with you.
So when you think about commercializing your current company and your current solution, what are you doing differently in this company when you think about this being the 7th company that you are building from scratch? Help us debunk maybe some myths that entrepreneurs believe, or just some additional lessons learned as you come along.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes to the focus on a very specific narrow area. I think that's one thing in our company right now. We're selling a content syndication service to help suppliers of life science tools build trust and confidence in their products. Now, so I think we've taken one very specific area to monetize. We also have a platform where scientists can come in and use as a search engine, but we've chosen not to monetize that. So it's not that it's not monetizable, we've chosen not to monetize. That's a big difference there. And I think that requires a lot of discipline. And I think we've kind of developed that discipline. And you have to be careful because you can get opinions along the way, pulling you in one direction or the other. And I think that's also something which I've learned to listen to, people who talk to you, accept the data points, but then analyze it and always go with what your own gut is telling you to do, even if it's against someone who might have, the biggest title in the world, or, titles, they don't know your company. Nobody knows your company as well as you know your company. So listen to others and, use those data points to make maybe better decisions, but still go with what you think is critical. So that's one thing. It's the whole focus aspect in terms of monetization. So choose one, and it's a little different from what we talked about earlier, because earlier we talked about, different markets to sell to. We're still going to the same market, but we're going with a much, just monetizing one aspect of our technology and being very focused in that strategy. The second thing I will bring forth is that I think companies too often just start, okay, I'm just going to build this platform or build this app or, build this product, this tool, and they start selling it. They don't look at it as, okay, what is my overall strategy to become a leader in this market? And there's this whole term of scalable monopoly. I think Peter Thiel brought it about, which is really critical because you want to take a market where you can actually become monopolistic in that market and actually own it. So, and that might take more than just developing a product and going to market right away. You might have to have different strategic aspects to it. So you might want to, in our case, for example, we're building the researcher community. We're building the supplier community. We're kind of bringing those maybe together. So there's all these concepts of, okay, I'm staging it. I'm starting with one thing, then I'm going to do the next thing, then I'm going to do the third thing. So kind of like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Think of your company in terms of that. It doesn't have to be just one single tool or product because you want to win in the overall strategy. It's not just by so you're building a company. You're not just developing a product. It's very different. Think of a company as more of a strategic thing. A product is more of a tactical element in building a successful company. So I think those are the kind of the main things which I've honed here. But I do want to say, and I'm very humble, although I've done a lot of companies, it's sometimes scary how little I feel I know, because it's just learning all the time. And I'm not even talking about, okay, how little I know about other fields I haven't worked in. I'm just talking about just common business sense, and it's remarkable. So I really feel that every entrepreneur, if they can do themselves a huge favor, remain humble and just be very open to learning. And it doesn't matter who's teaching it, just constantly suck in information, try to put it into the context that you're currently working, and then try to convey that knowledge forth to others. But, I talked to some very smart people who are kind of, getting on in the years, and they basically said that what their focus is on life after they've been very successful is two things. They're focused on teaching and learning. Yeah. That's their life. And if we think about it in that sense, if our lives can be focused around teaching and learning, I think that's really the core to all of this in the long run.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like my doctorate is in a specific business problem. That was 7 years ago. I learned something new every single day. It's incredible peeling the layers back. And so I think it's spot on. We continuously learn, and it's not even that market conditions changed. It's just that there's a whole lot of information out there, even about a single business problem.
Yeah, no, it's endless. And I think that's always, there's a flip side to this as well, is that some people say, okay, just sit down and read books all the time.
Right.
But, there's no way that someone who's running a startup can sit down and read books all the time. And even if you just looking at articles, there's so much data out there. So I really suggest that when somebody's operating a company, try to focus on those things which are specifically going to help you continue developing your product and or monetizing, commercializing what you're doing. It's very easy to get sucked into all these theories and strategies, which, very often do not apply at all to what you're doing. So again, I think that's the flip side of this. Try not to waste time on just general learning, which might be interesting. If it's not applicable to moving you forward, wait until you exit.
Yep. That sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with our listeners and viewers today. So if folks want to get a hold of you after the show, how do they do that?
So the best way to do this is email me directly, and my email is daniel@bioz.com. So it's DANIEL @BIOZ.com. I'm totally happy to help people out. And if there's some great ideas there that I can introduce to the Startup Stanford Accelerator, I'm happy to do that. Like I said, I'm really excited to be helping others along their journey. Perseverance, I will mention towards the end that is what I have found to be key, because one thing it's hard to do, it's hard to time the market. You really do not know if your specific product will be most accepted today or in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So, continue doing what you're doing and your time will come.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Roxy.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and your attention. To save time and get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who's been sharing the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of COIQ.